The coffee smelled wrong, bitter with a metallic edge. But it wasn't just the scent that made me pause. It was the way he smiled as he handed it to me, like he already knew I wouldn't make it to the interview. This isn't a story about poison coffee. It's about the slow kind of sabotage, the kind that comes from inside your own home, from someone who's supposed to protect you. It's about gut instinct, quiet defiance, and a mug of coffee that almost decided my future. My name is Andrew Bishop. I'm 26, and for the past 14 months, I've been living with my mom and her husband, Craig, a man who believes real work comes with dirt under your nails, and that dreams like mine belong in the trash. But this morning, he handed me a mug, and I finally saw him for who he was. "Drink up. It'll help with the nerves," he said, sliding the travel mug across the kitchen counter. He didn't look at me when he said it, just waited. I lifted it, pretending to sip, and smiled. "Thanks. I'll take it to go." The weight of the mug fell off. The smell clung to my nose, chemical, bitter. I didn't have proof. Not then. But my gut knew Craig had just handed me a decision. Not just about whether or not to drink the coffee, but about whether I was going to keep letting someone else write the story of my life. And that's where this really begins. He'd never made me coffee before. Not once in the 14 months I'd been back under that roof. But that morning, he was already in the kitchen, mug in hand, smile too tight to feel real. "Big day," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Figured you could use something to steady your nerves." I watched as he poured it. My favorite mug, the travel one I bought with my first freelance check. Steam curled up from the rim, carrying a strange, bitter scent with it. Sharp, metallic, unsettling, and I smiled anyway. "Thanks," I said, lifting the mug carefully. "I'll take it to go." We talk a lot about red flags and relationships, but we rarely talk about what they smell like. Sometimes, a red flag isn't someone yelling at you or slamming a door. Sometimes, it's the quiet way someone does something nice. When it's the exact wrong kind of nice, at the exact wrong time. It wasn't just the coffee. It was the way he watched me, the way his arms stayed crossed, like he was waiting for me to trust him, waiting for me to drink. And in that moment, I remembered every time he called my career a waste of time, every smirk when I mentioned a new opportunity, every little accident that always seemed to happen right before a big step forward. This wasn't a man wishing me luck. This was a man holding on to control, the kind that doesn't come from yelling, but from making you doubt yourself. And here's something I've learned the hard way. Not all abuse looks like anger. Sometimes it looks like a steaming cup, handed over with a smile. If something feels wrong, it probably is, and the bravest thing you can do is listen to that quiet voice that says, "Something's not right here." So I took the coffee, and I left the house. But I didn't drink it. 2 blocks later, at a gas station, I poured it into the trash, watched it swirl, oily and dark, into a mess of napkins and fast food wrappers. And I drove to my interview with my hands shaking, but my mind clear. Because sometimes the first step to reclaiming your life is dumping the coffee someone else made for you. When you're 26 and still living at home, there's a certain look people give you. It's not always unkind. Sometimes it's a raised eyebrow. Sometimes it's a polite nod that lingers just a second too long. But the worst part? It's not from strangers. It's from the people you already know. Craig never had to say the words directly, though sometimes he did. "You're still here? Thought you'd be moved out by now." Back in my day, we didn't sit around waiting for life to start. Every comment came with a smile, and every smile came with a sting. But what he and people like him don't understand is that I wasn't sitting around. I was building something, quietly, one freelance job at a time. One design project, one cover letter, one mock-up, one late night. Yes, I'd come home after graduation. Yes, what was meant to be a 3-month stopgap had stretched into 14 months. But it wasn't because I was lazy. It was because entry-level jobs were scarce. Because Missoula isn't exactly the marketing capital of the world. Because student loans are real and rent prices don't wait. What I needed wasn't judgment. It was space. Space to try, to fail, to try again. But Craig didn't see trying. He saw a grown man playing on a laptop in his pajamas. And I started to believe it. That's the cruelest part of shame. It doesn't come from your own voice at first. It comes from someone else's. But over time, it echoes. So let me say this clearly for anyone out there who needs to hear it. Your timeline is your own. You are not late. You are not behind. You are not broken. Living at home in your 20s doesn't make you less. It makes you human, especially in a world where the ladder keeps getting higher and the first few rungs are missing. What matters isn't when you move out. It's what you carry with you when you do. And I was carrying more than I realized. Resentment, yes, but also hope, and a folder full of designs I'd pour my heart into. The interview at Granite Peak was more than a job opportunity. It was a test, not my skills, but of whether I still believed in myself. After so many days of being told, subtly, constantly, that I shouldn't. So, let me take you back to the brand, the dream, and the moment that changed everything. Craig builds things with his hands. Framing, roofing, drywall. He smells like sawdust and diesel and pride. The kind of pride that comes from sweat-stained work shirts and 6 a.m. alarms. The kind that doesn't understand what it means to build something with pixels. When I told him I wanted to study advertising and design, he looked at me like I'd said I wanted to become a magician. For years to make brochures? People don't pay for pretty pictures. They pay for real work. I smiled. I laughed it off. But it chipped away, little by little. You see, Craig didn't just see my path as unfamiliar. He saw it as unmanly, unreal, unworthy. And I don't think it was because he hated me. I think it was because he didn't understand me. Because everything I was reflected back everything he wasn't. He built houses. I built campaigns. He swung hammers. I wrote taglines. To him, there was only one kind of strength, the kind that left your back sore and your boots muddy. And anything else? Well, it must be weak. Or worse, fake. What I know then, but understand now, is this. Some men aren't threatened by failure. They're threatened by imagination. Because imagination isn't something they can measure or control. Craig had always known how to fix broken cabinets. But a son with ambition he couldn't understand, that was something he couldn't repair or contain. It wasn't just a generational divide. It was a competition I never entered, but somehow still had to win. And that's the trap so many of us fall into, isn't it? Believing we need to earn the approval of someone who has no interest in giving it. But here's what I've learned. You don't have to be understood to be valid. You don't have to explain your dreams in a language someone else approves of. Real masculinity doesn't fear creativity. It recognizes it. It celebrates it. It makes space for it at the table. I wasn't looking for a fight with Craig. I was looking for peace within myself. But peace doesn't come from shrinking. It comes from standing tall in the life you've chosen. And that's what made the next part so important. Because just when I thought the worst of Craig was behind me, the quiet sabotage had only just begun. It started with the alarm clock. One morning, I woke up 40 minutes late for a video interview. I blamed myself. Maybe I'd set the wrong time. Then a week later, my Wi-Fi dropped in the middle of another call. Unstable connection. The screen warned. I restarted the router twice. Craig walked by and said, "Technology, huh? Never reliable." Another time, my portfolio files were gone from the folder I always kept them in. I found them, eventually, moved to a different drive. "Maybe you were tired," Craig said, "working too late again." Each incident felt small, dismissible, like maybe I was just stressed, forgetful, clumsy even. But here's the thing about patterns. They don't scream at you. They whisper, and they only become clear when you step back far enough to see the whole canvas. Looking back now, I can trace the line. Every accident, conveniently timed around a potential opportunity. Every glitch leading to discouragement, delay, doubt. Because when someone doesn't have the power to stop you outright, they'll chip away at your confidence piece by piece, until you stop yourself, And that's the part no one tells you about subtle sabotage. It doesn't look like sabotage. It looks like bad luck. A weak signal, a sleepy morning, a misclick, until you realize it always happens when you're about to grow. Here's a truth I wish I'd learned sooner. Not everything that goes wrong is your fault. But the longer you're made to feel that way, the more you begin to shrink inside your own story. Sometimes sabotage wears a friendly face. It doesn't raise its voice. It just moves the pieces behind the scenes until you stop playing the game altogether. But I hadn't stopped playing. Not yet. I'd been working quietly, refining designs, submitting applications. And then one evening it happened. A real email, a real offer. Granite Peak Outfitters, the brand I'd grown up admiring, wanted to interview me. And that's when Craig changed tactics. No more unplugged routers or subtle barbs. This time, he handed me a coffee mug. And what he didn't know was I'd been paying attention. Granite Peak Outfitters wasn't just a company. It was the company. The one whose gear I'd use on every childhood camping trip. Whose catalogs I'd read like adventure novels. Whose brand voice I'd studied in college at classes like it was gospel. And now they wanted to interview me. Not for an internship. Not for a freelance trial. For a full-time job. A real one. Marketing coordinator. When I got the email, I actually laughed. The kind of laugh you let out when you're too shocked to smile. And then I did what I always do when I get good news. I told my mom. She hugged me tight and whispered, "I always knew you'd find your way." And for a moment, I believed it too. Craig stood at the sink, rinsing dishes, his back to us. All he said was, "Don't count your chickens." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not out of fear, out of hope. I laid in bed going over my mock-ups, the campaign ideas, the pitch I practiced in the mirror. Because this wasn't just a job. This was a way out, a way forward, a doorway back into the version of myself I'd nearly lost under his roof. And the next morning, early, crisp, quiet, I came into the kitchen to find Craig already there. Coffee brewed, travel mug waiting. "Figured you could use some fuel," he said, pouring the dark liquid slowly. "Special blend. Should help with the nerves." The moment the mug touched my hand, my stomach turned. Not just from the smell, chemical, bitter, off, but from his eyes. Calm, calculated, like he'd already decided I wasn't coming back with good news. And that's when it hit me. This job didn't just threaten his opinion of me. It threatened his control over me. Because what happens when the person you've underestimated starts to rise? What happens when the one you thought you could belittle walks out the front door and never looks back? Craig didn't want me to fail because he hated me. He wanted me to fail because my success would prove he was wrong. And some people would rather see you stuck than admit they never believed in you. That coffee mug wasn't a drink. It was a message. You don't get to grow without my permission. But that morning, I didn't ask for it. I dumped the coffee in a gas station trash, 2 blocks away. And 30 minutes later, I walked into Granite Peak's lobby with nothing but my ideas, my portfolio, and a small black coffee from the cafe across the street. And that's where everything began to change. Pause for a moment. Has there ever been a time when someone you trusted tried to hold you back? Subtly, silently? Maybe it wasn't a mug of coffee. Maybe it was a comment, a doubt, a door that never opened when you needed it most. If this story has stirred something in you, share it. Leave a comment below and tell us, how did it make you feel? What moment hit you the hardest? You never know. Your story might be the one someone else needs to hear today. The receptionist smiled as I walked in. The kind of smile that says, "You belong here." And for the first time in a long time, I started to believe that maybe I did. I sat in the lobby with my portfolio on my lap, open but untouched, not because I wasn't prepared, but because I prepared for this day 100 different ways, in 1,000 different quiet moments, late nights, tiny freelance gigs, mock campaigns I posted online that barely got 2 likes, one of which, by the way, was from my mom. But someone had seen one of those posts, someone at Granite Peak, and that's what brought me here. When the interviewer called my name, I stood up, not just taller, but clearer, Not because the fear was gone, but because I knew who I was walking in as. I talked them through my vision for their spring line, how their brand could lean deeper into stories from real customers, how a good ad isn't just about selling gear. It's about inviting people to imagine who they could become when they wear it. They listened, really listened, and when they asked me, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years, Andrew?" I didn't hesitate. "Building something lasting," I said, "something that helps people feel like they belong in the story you're telling." And in that moment, I wasn't just interviewing for a job. I was stepping into my own voice. Here's the thing about self-worth. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits until you're sitting in a gray conference room with your hands slightly trembling and finally reminds you, you were never the problem. You were just in the wrong place with the wrong people for too long. That afternoon, when I got the call offering me the position, I didn't cry. I didn't jump. I just breathed, because this wasn't about celebration. This was about confirmation that the version of me I'd been fighting for, quietly, stubbornly, had been real all along. But that feeling didn't last long, because when I walked through the front door that evening, I didn't expect to find Craig, slumped on the couch, a bucket by his side, and my mug sitting empty beside him. And what happened next? Let's just say, the truth has a funny way of brewing itself. The front door clicked shut behind me, and everything felt still. No TV, no humming from the fridge, just a low, unsteady sound. Guttural, sickly. And then I saw him, Craig, slumped on the living room couch, a plastic bucket wedged between his knees, his face pale, his shirt damp with sweat, and next to him, on the side table, my travel mug, the one I dumped out 2 blocks from home. He looked up when he saw me, eyes glassy, mouth twitching like he couldn't decide whether to sneer or explain. "You're back," he mumbled, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. I nodded. Got the job. Just that. 3 words. But the impact landed heavier than I expected. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. Then something colder, resentment, maybe, or defeat. And just like that, he doubled over the bucket again. My mom came rushing in from the kitchen, worry etched on her face. "Andrew, you're home. How did it go?" "They offered me the position," I said, my voice lighter than it had been in months. She pulled me into a hug. "I knew you could do it." Over her shoulder, I watched Craig. He wasn't looking at us, just staring at the carpet, still sweating. What happened to him? I asked gently, pulling away. "Food poisoning, I think," she whispered. "Said he felt fine this morning, but an hour after you left." My stomach turned, not from fear, from certainty, because he hadn't gone out for breakfast. He hadn't eaten anything from a diner. He'd drunk the coffee, the one he'd made for me. I didn't say anything, not yet, but that night, once Craig had passed out in the bedroom and the house had gone quiet, I opened a small drawer in my desk and pulled out the bottle I'd taken from his truck weeks earlier, unmarked, worn. Inside, crushed white tablets, sleep aids, the same ones that had left a powdery film at the bottom of the mug. And that's when it all clicked. The stomach bug before my last big interview. The files gone missing. The alarms that somehow didn't ring. This wasn't paranoia. It was a pattern. Craig hadn't just doubted me. He'd sabotaged me. Intentionally. Repeatedly. Quietly. Because keeping me dependent meant keeping me small. And the second I showed signs of leaving, he panicked. Here's the thing about control. People who need it don't just lose their minds when it slips. They unravel. And sometimes their downfall is as simple as a careless sip from the wrong mug. Here's the truth no one wants to say. Sabotage always comes with a price tag. Sometimes you pay for it. But sometimes the person who set the trap walks straight into it themselves. That moment changed everything for me. Not because I had proof, but because I finally stopped questioning myself. And I wasn't done yet, because the next person who needed to see the truth was my mother. And what came next would break everything wide open. The next morning, I sat across from my mom at the kitchen table. There was cereal in front of me, A quiet hum from the fridge. And Craig, silent, stiff, scrolling on his phone, sitting in his usual chair. He didn't say a word, didn't look at me, didn't touch his coffee. Feeling better? I asked, calm as could be. Fine, he muttered, barely lifting his head. I took a spoonful of cereal and said, Good. I've got some apartment listings to check out today. I'm moving out before the new job starts. His head snapped up. Already? You just got the offer yesterday. No sense wasting time, I said with a smile. I've been saving for months. And that's when his jaw clenched, because he knew his grip was slipping. And what he didn't know yet was how much else I had started to see. Later that week, I found Mom standing in the hallway outside my room, her eyes red-rimmed. Can we talk? She asked softly. She sat on the edge of my bed, fidgeting with the sleeve of her sweater. Craig told me you've been hostile toward him, she began. He said you left a threatening note in his toolbox. I sat down beside her. Did he tell you what was in the coffee he made for me the morning of my interview? She blinked. He said it was food poisoning from a diner. He never went to a diner. I said, he made that coffee here, and he drank it by mistake. I got up, went to my desk, and pulled out the pill bottle I'd saved. Unmarked, worn, filled with crushed white tablets. I found this in his truck weeks ago. She stared at the bottle like it might bite her. That's a serious accusation, Andrew. I nodded, which is why I haven't said anything until now. And then, slowly, I told her everything. The alarm clocks, the missing files, the interviews cut short, the pattern. Her face fell with every detail. But Craig has always wanted what's best for us, she whispered. For you? Maybe, I said. But I don't think he ever wanted me to succeed, because the more I stood on my own, the less he could control. She stood up suddenly and began pacing. This doesn't make sense. Craig, he handles our finances. He always has. It stresses me out too much. My chest tightened. How long has it been since you actually check your accounts? I asked. Silence. I walked over to her gently. Mom, when was the last time you saw a statement? A balance? A deposit? She sank onto the bed, her hands trembling. I don't know. And that's when I told her about the bank notice I'd seen a month earlier. Overdrawn. Despite her being one of the most careful, frugal people I knew, that was the moment everything shifted. Because emotional manipulation is hard to prove, but missing money, that's something you can trace. Here's what no one talks about. Financial abuse isn't loud. It's not bruises or screaming matches. It's quiet. It looks like, I'll take care of the bills. Like, you don't need to worry about that. Like, it's just easier if I handle everything. And slowly, so slowly, you forget how much you've handed over, until there's nothing left. And you wake up one day and realize you're not just hurt, you're trapped. That's what my mom was beginning to understand. And she didn't say much after that. Just one sentence. Show me everything. That night, we opened drawers, dug through papers, logged into accounts Craig never thought she'd check. And what we found was worse than either of us expected. But the truth has a way of making space. And soon, my mother, the woman I thought might never leave, started making a plan to reclaim her life. The thing about starting over in your 50s is people think you won't. They assume you'll stay. That comfort and routine will always win over risk and freedom. That silence is safer than uncertainty. But not my mom. Not anymore. After seeing the missing money, the forged signatures, the way Craig had siphoned her security one small lie at a time, something shifted. The woman who used to whisper, "Just let it go," now sat at the dining table with a pen in one hand and a list of attorneys in the other. "I've opened a new account," she told me one evening, her voice low but steady. "I moved what's left of my savings. It's not much, but it's mine." I looked at her differently that night, not as someone who needed protection, but as someone who had chosen to take back her power. "The bank is investigating," she added. "Almost $20,000 gone over 3 years, withdrawn in amounts just under the alert threshold. She said it like a report, detached, measured, but I could hear the pain underneath it. Her dreams, her retirement, dissolving under the weight of someone else's control. Here's what most people don't realize. Divorce isn't always about love lost. Sometimes it's about dignity reclaimed. Sometimes it's the first real step toward remembering who you are when you're no longer being rewritten by someone else. And age, it doesn't disqualify you. It equips you, because when you spent years making room for everyone else's voice, you know how powerful it is to finally use your own. My mom met with a lawyer the Monday after I moved out, filed for divorce, froze all joint accounts, told Craig she was done. He didn't take it well. At first, he played the victim. Then came the apologies, the tears, the promises that it was all just a misunderstanding, that he was going to pay her back, that he never meant to hurt her. But we both knew better. Because when someone poisons your future, literally or financially, you don't owe them closure. You owe yourself a second chance. I still remember the morning I called her from my new place. Just a quick check-in. She answered on the second ring, her voice lighter. "It's done," she said. "The police came this morning. Craig had been arrested. Forgery, financial fraud, prescription drug violations. The evidence was undeniable. And she was already at her sister's house, sitting on the porch with a mug of tea, and her shoulders finally relaxed. Here's the lesson I took from all of it. Starting over doesn't mean you failed the first time. It means you finally chose yourself. Whether you're 26 or 56, whether it's a new job, a new home, or just a new way of thinking, you deserve a life that feels like yours. And what came next? It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like healing. For her, for me, for both of us. And that healing was just beginning. 6 months later, I stood on a ridge just outside Missoula. The air was crisp, sharp with the scent of pine and the promise of snow. Below me, the valley was lit in gold and amber, little houses glowing like tiny heartbeats. And in my hand was the travel mug, the one Craig handed me that morning, the one I never drank from, the one that nearly became the last thing standing between me and the life I have now. I turned it over slowly in my hands, ran my thumb along the seam. It was scratched, dull in places, but still intact. Just like me, at work, I just wrapped my first solo campaign. Granite Peak had let me lead their winter launch, a series that featured real stories from customers whose lives had changed through adventure. It felt full circle somehow, like I got to put a piece of myself into something that finally made it out there, into the world. And Mom, she'd moved to Bozeman, used part of her recovered savings to lease a small brick building downtown. She texted me a picture the day she signed the papers, her standing in front of the door, holding a set of keys, grinning like a kid. The caption just said, "Coffee shop opens next month." 20 years of dreams, on hold, pause, pushed aside, finally waking up. And that's the thing no one talks about when they say, starting over. They make it sound like erasing, like going backward. But it's not. Starting over is planting again, this time with better soil, with stronger roots, with a deeper understanding of what you need to grow. And sometimes the people you thought would celebrate with you aren't part of the harvest. And that's okay, because healing isn't about proving them wrong. It's about living in a way that proves you were always right to believe in yourself. I stood there for a while, breathing it in, the silence, the space, the stillness that comes when you're no longer shrinking to fit someone else's story. And then, without a word, I set the travel mug down on a flat stone by the edge of the ridge. Let it go, not in anger, not in spite, but in peace. It had done its job. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't justice. It's joy, and the life you build with your own hands, quietly, patiently, after everyone else stops believing in you, is the kind that no one can ever take away. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Sometimes, the people who try to dim your light are the ones standing closest to you. But the lesson here is simple. You don't need to fight fire with fire. Sometimes, the most powerful kind of revenge is building a life so strong, so honest, that no one can take it away from you. If this story moved you, tell us. Drop a comment below and share how it made you feel. Which part spoke to you the loudest? And if you believe in the quiet strength of second chances, hit like, share this story with someone who needs it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real, powerful moments, because your next story might be just one video away.